Hey guys, I just want to make a little video because for our limited time to help kind of go over the psychological approaches real quick. So again, psychology is the study of behavior and mental processes. Um, and it turns out it can be really complicated and difficult to explain why certain people do things and think a certain way. Um, so what has happened is different approaches have been developed um, of different ways of kind of like tackling the problem of explaining behavior and so on. So we're just going to go through the approaches real quick. Um, it's in your book and you'll have the slideshow here. You can. So I'm not going to pause long enough for maybe if you're taking notes, which you should be, to write everything down. But of course, it's a video, so you can pause it at your leisure. Some of these are definitely more popular than others, and not popular like I guess the traditional sense of like people like it or whatever, but just have more validity and testing and evidence behind them. So again, I mentioned this before, but big question in psychology and um, some other sciences as well. So the nature versus nurture argument. How much are we products of our environment? And how much are we products of our upbringing? And how much are we just kind of pre-programmed genetic code of this is who we're always going to be? And we'll certainly talk about that. There's a lot of great studies with identical twins, and sometimes identical twins are actually separated, so they grow up in different families. So that's a great way to look at nature versus nurture because they have two different nurtures, but the same genetic code, the same nature. So we'll talk about that as we go, but it's still a big debate of how much of you is impacted by these two factors. So something to make sure you're always considering. So here's just a quick breakdown um, of the different approaches, as you can see there, and the people who are kind of behind it. We will talk about pretty much all of these people in more in depth as we go throughout the year together. So you'll be seeing these names and maybe some of them Freud, maybe Pavlov sounds familiar to you. The Pavlov dog experiment, and maybe some others, but those are kind of the main ones. So we'll talk about them more as we go through the lessons. So the big one is behavioral approach, and this is by far the most uh, psychologists today are cognitive behavioralists. And behavioralism is, and really hardcore behavioralism, that Skinner and Watson emphasized is like it's all nurture. So it is all about conditioning. It is all about having a stimulus and response to that stimulus, reinforcement and punishment, and we'll go over this in great depth um, as we go. So this is not really like we looked at that quote of Watson is like, give me anyone, I don't care what their background or their ethnicities, give me anyone, and I can make them anything because it's all about nurture. It's all about conditioning them to exhibit the behaviors that you want them to exhibit. Okay, so behavioralist is the most um, prominent field of psychology, and it really emerged as a counter to the functionalists and the structuralists that were trying to use introspection to look inside people's brains. And the behavioralists were like, look, you can't do that. That's not science. Like, you're not getting good data. Science is you have to collect your data and then make your decisions based upon that. Well, what data can we collect? Well, we can look at behaviors. Behaviors are overt. You can see someone doing something. If that person is exhibiting behavior, I can see them doing it. I can observe them doing it, and I can measure that. And so that was kind of, we need to keep this a science, and we need data, and behavioralism, observing behaviors is how we can do that. Um, the psychoanalytical. This is Freud. It's all about the unconscious. It's all about you have these desires inside of you that you aren't really even aware of, and Freud would say a lot of them are caused by childhood. We'll go through his stages of development for children, um, and your behavior is influenced by these unconscious desires and this kind of struggle between what he called the id, which is your desire, like your animalistic primal physiological urges. I just want to do this and I want that and I want this and I want that, and then your super ego, which is kind of your learned how to adapt in society sense. Like, okay, well, we can't just take whatever we want because there's rules and there's laws and this is how you behave in society. So it's kind of like you think about the angel and the devil on your shoulder. So the id's like the devil, like, do whatever you want, like satisfy your own urges. And then the super ego's like, no, you can't do that. Like, you got to think about society and do the right thing. So you have this struggle. So you have these unconscious desires, and that's what causes you um, to exhibit certain behaviors. Not terribly popular anymore because again, there's not. It's really hard to prove. There's not a lot of science behind it. If your unconscious desires, like how do you measure someone's unconscious? And they've tried, but there's no really valid ways they've found so far. So, but because it's Freud and and there's some we'll talk about some good ideas he had as well that might very well be true. Um, so here's the thing about psychology. It tends to be kind of negative. It's a lot of it's about like what's wrong with you. Why are you doing these bad things? Why are you thinking this bad way? Why are you depressed? Why are you schizophrenic? Why are like it's kind of looking at what's the problem with you, and then how do we fix the problem? And I guess maybe medicine and helping people is kind of that way in general. Like let's fix what's wrong with you. And then around the 70s, the 1970s, Rogers and Maslow started thinking like why can't we talk about what's right with someone? Like, why does it always have to be negative? Why does it have to be fixing problems? Why can't we just talk about like people are great? Like, let's focus on the good things about people. This is positive psychology, and it's really come on a lot lately as well. Let's focus on what makes people great and their strengths and whether individuals, and let's build those things up as well. It's not always just about fixing problems. Like, you don't have to be, you know and I say the word problem not like as a negative thing, like there's kind of like you have depression, there's like it's your fault and what's wrong with you kind of thing, like a judgmental sort of way. But people think like I need to go to see a psychiatrist if I'm feeling signs of depression or if I'm not happy or whatever. Like, why can't you just go see a psychologist all the time? Like anyone, like let's just go and talk. Like, hey man, things are going pretty good, but like and I really like this and like, why does it always have to be, as a negative way? So, one thing I think this is really important for us right now, especially, and something that's kind of self-affirming. If school maybe isn't, you're struggling a little bit, and you maybe the end of last year as well. So this is from Maslow. This is called the hierarchy of needs. I think I mentioned this in my intro video as well. But basically, so here's the pyramid. In order to move up the pyramid, each level has to be satisfied. Okay? So your physiological needs come first. All right? Like if you're super hungry, not just like, oh, I haven't eaten in 20 minutes, like you're literally like starving. You don't care about math. Like you don't care about anything but getting food. You're super thirsty. You don't care about anything other than getting that water. Okay, so your physiological needs, your safety needs, if you don't feel safe and secure, this right here might be hurting a lot for us. We're really, the virus and society, and there's a lot of stuff going on. We might feel very unsafe, unsecure, and that's adding stress to us, relationships. So really what we need to do is make sure all of these needs are satisfied. And then we can go up to this is where we want to be self-actualization of fulfilling your potential intellectually and creatively, and so on. Okay, so like let's be aware of ourselves and let's focus on these things to make sure we have that foundation of the pyramid in place before we can kind of move up. Cognitive is also, like I said, the most psychologists today are cognitive behavioralists. And with modern technologies, you see my dog in the background, modern technology allows us to see inside the brain, and we can actually look and peer cognitively a lot better than we could, obviously, before that technology. But how the brain develops, how thought develops, Piaget is kind of the guru here in the first one, focusing on the development of kids, and we'll talk about the stages as well. So how the mental processes works, if you deliver the same piece of information to two different people, they might digest that information two completely different ways, and they might approach their thought process two completely different ways. So what how can one person take a crisis and like, all right, we're going to handle it, we're going to think it out, we're going to make good decisions, and then some people get a crisis and they're just like they have no idea what to do and they fall apart and they start thinking terrible things and so on. So the cognitive approach, our thinking process. Biological approach, the thing it says in the book, probably heard it a million times, all psychology is biology. Like if you're doing a behavior, there is a biological process that is happening that is allowing you to do that behavior. If you're doing a cognitive, there's a biological process, and behaviors and thought process can very much be influenced by biology. If there's problems with certain parts of the brain, or you have nerves that aren't firing correctly, or so on, can very much influence people's their behaviors and their thought processes. So we'll talk about the brain. We'll talk about the nervous system and endocrine system and stuff. So all some people I was going to give you an example, but I want to save it for when you guys do your assignment on Thursday, so you guys can think about it. But all psychology is biology. There's a biological process going by. And then Charles Darwin, I assume you're familiar with, is the scientist who basically explained evolution and natural selection. And this is our last approach, is evolutionary psychology. Actually, no, it's not. We got one more after this. So the central premise is natural selection occurs for behavioral as well as physical characteristics. So it's not just about which animal has the biggest, is like the largest, and the male is the largest, and so they can mate with the female and reproduce. There's a behavioral component of that as well, especially with human beings, because there's, think about attractiveness from one person to another, something like sense of humor. Like, there's no reason why sense of humor should be attractive from one person to another, because there's no, having a good sense of humor doesn't allow you to get more food and survive as, kind of just a purely biological way. So there's a behavioral component to our selection of friends and mates and so on, beyond just the keep your gene pool alive and the biggest and the strongest males and the biggest and strongest females, that kind of stuff. And then last, and this is really coming into play, is the socio-cultural approach, and sometimes evolutionary is thrown in there as well. So the psychology of how we behave in groups, and we'll definitely talk about social psychology. One big valid criticism of psychology. So it's like you psychology is again a science, and you need to get data from to create that science, and there's a lot of different ways you can get data. Preferably it's an experiment if you can do that, because experiments are the only way to show true cause and effect. Well, how do you make an experiment? If you're a psychologist, if you're like a research psychologist, you probably work for a university, because that's where you get your funding from, because you're not really selling a product to people. Like, you work for probably a university, so you want to conduct an experiment. Well, where are you going to get your subjects from an experiment? Well, probably university students, right? Probably students who maybe are in a grad program, or you put a flyer and hey, does anyone want earn $20 for coming to and doing a test in the psychology lab for a couple hours, kind of thing. So a vast majority of psychological experiments has been conducted on college students, who trend, not so much anymore, but have traditionally trend male and trend white and trend upper middle class. So psychology historically has been upper middle class males studying upper middle class males. And so, is the information we're finding applicable to other ethnicities, other socioeconomic groups? Can we make these broad statements of, all people react like this given this situation? Well, maybe not, because person, again, this go back to kind of the nature of the nurture thing. Someone growing up in a certain area of the country with a certain, socioeconomic, ethnic group might behave very, very differently than someone else in a different part of the country or even part of the world for that matter. So, studying about culturally and socially impacts our behavior is one that's increasingly becoming more and more, especially as technology has allowed our world to get smaller and smaller and smaller because we're so interconnected. Okay, so those are the different approaches to psychology. I'll show you a little trick on Friday to help kind of remember it, and we'll do an FRQ together on the different approaches as well. So please let me know if you got any questions. Shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to get on to help you. I hope you guys are having a good day.